Welcome to the One Advantage podcast, exploring the intersections of peer power, culture, and agility. Your hosts, Jason Richmond, Mike Richardson, and Leo Bottary, co-founders of the One Advantage community of practice and Advantage peer groups. For more information, please visit us at idealoutcomesinc.com.
Hey everybody, welcome back for another episode of the One Advantage podcast. Excitingly, we have a full house today. We're always pleased to see that. We've got Leo here, we've got Jason here, and myself, Mike Richardson, and we are going to have a good one today, everybody. Leveraging a lifelong learning mindset, fostering a learning culture can upskill your team and make your organization a hub for innovation and growth. Lifelong learning encompasses not only formal training programs, but also learning from your peers. I think Leo knows a few things about that, and embracing an agile mindset with a culture in an ever-changing world. Jason knows a lot about that. We are going to have a great conversation today, but as ever, first and foremost, let's find out where everybody's been and what they've been up to. Leo, where have you been and what you've been up to?
So this has been part of a whirlwind Monday to Monday. I was San Diego to Dallas, back to San Diego to Philadelphia. I'll be then going to West Palm Beach, Chicago, and back home Monday night.
Of course. I'm looking more closely at your video backdrop here, and I see a nondescript hotel room.
Yes, all of the splendors of your basic hotel room, exactly.
Awesome. And so Leo's on his whirlwind non-stop national and international tour, spreading the good word of peer innovation, everybody, that no doubt will be an essential component of what we're about to talk about today with learning organizations. And Jason, where have you been and what you've been up to? Now, I already know a partial answer to that question. You have just been in Orange County, or are you still here?
I'm still in Orange County. I started the week off in New York. Highly engaged with a high-level executive leadership team in regards to organizational culture and development. Matter of fact, this concept of lifelong learning and looking at defining moments and aha moments and learning from peers was a big topic of ours on Tuesday. Yep. Tuesday night, I flew out to Orange County, and I also will be heading to Chicago from here.
Okay, one of my favorite places, and I know yours too.
Yep.
And I'm sure Leo's, and we're going to try to rendezvous somewhere before too long and strategize everybody over a glass of wine, which will be really cool to do. But for now, and I've been pretty much here, been talking to people all over the world by video call, of course, all the time, cooking up some exciting new plans for our North American operation with REF that will become clear before too long. But let's turn to our topic today. Leveraging a lifelong learning mindset. Jason, as you were just saying, you've been in this field for many, many, many years. How do you begin to think about that topic of being a learning organization?
Well, first of all, I think it starts what I think the key word in there, Mike and Leo, and I'm a big believer in this, is mindset.
Yeah.
Right? The ability to be open to the fact that you're learning constantly if you're in tune and if you're living in other people's interest, right? You're not going to teach yourself anything, right? And if you're an individual that operates in your own interest, right, you're not learning. But it's the mindset of getting in other people's interest and living in their interest and walking in their shoes. You're going to have aha moments and learning moments every day of your life.
Yeah, it's beautiful. That's a great start. And of course, we've always used the phrase mindset, but it's taken on a new meaning more recently with some of the great work around fixed mindset and growth mindset and all of that kind of stuff. How do you begin to think about this, Leo?
I think this really standing on the shoulders of what Jason said. I think this idea of having a beginner's mind, that seeing ourselves as students of our craft, not as experts in our craft, is a great place to start. Oftentimes we'll go and hear speakers, we'll read books, we'll see all kinds of things, and it's easy to dismiss, I've heard that before, I understand that topic and all that. But if you actually really pay attention and use a term that Howard Gardner from Harvard always likes to say is be in that role where you're trying to apprehend the information, right? Where, there may be a lot of things you've heard there, but there's going to be a nugget. There's going to be a way someone frames something, a way someone shares a story or provides some data that's going to give you some interesting insights that you can add on to what you already know about the subject. And we may get into this later, but there's a lot of folks who are kind of self-proclaimed experts in their fields. And I think if someone wants to call you an expert, let them do it. Knock yourself out. I think that's great. But I think for the person themselves, don't call yourself an expert in anything. You're a student of what you do. There's always more to learn, always more to grow. And, I think if we begin there, then we actually have a chance to be open to learning in the way Jason talked about. And I know you alluded to as well.
Yeah, and I love the word apprehend. I love that. And what popped for me there was that saying, the future isn't what it used to be. Yeah. In other words, everybody, the future used to be something that played out slowly. You could sort of almost take for granted that, whatever worked this year is going to work next year and the year after, and maybe for the next 5 to 10 years, no big deal. But not anymore. And, I'm just looking at our heads here on the video, and Leo and I are in our 60s now. I think Jason's still in his 50s, but he's getting up there. And, there's a fair amount of gray hair on the call here, everybody. But we're not done learning. I mean, so for me, the key word is lifelong learning, right? Lifelong. We're not done learning. Oh my gosh, I have got so much to learn to lean into some of these big new strategies that I mentioned we're cooking up for our USA market. Oh my gosh, I'm going to have to learn some new tricks. This old dog is going to have to learn some new tricks to be very successful. So, Jason, tell us more. I mean, where do you see your clients going in trying to get their heads around and their arms around this idea of a learning mindset and becoming a lifelong learning organization? What does that take?
Yeah, and I think from recently, I would say over the last 12 months, Mike and Leo, you're well aware of this. Our clients and a lot of our work has really been developing learning tracks, learning and development in cohort modeling, where you've got groups of 20, 25, 28 people together that stay together, over a period of time. And the whole essence of that cohort modeling in regards to our growth and our development within our organizations starts with actually creating a community of learning in that room, right? So involved in those programs are sustainment pieces, research projects, group projects, and I always go back to some recent research that's gone out. 86% of the workforce now, if you want to learn something new, you learn it from a peer, which is right in Leo's runway, right? And it's absolutely true. And what we've found is that the business impact, the level of innovation, the revenue draining and cost saving projects that come out of these learning communities are higher than they ever been before.
Yeah.
Because now you've got people working from cross-functional teams in a forced learning environment, right? Building this learning a community with sustainment and continuation in between sessions, and even after it's done, they continually grow.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I loved it when you, how many years ago was that, Leo, when you wrote your third book and you came up with the title Peer Innovation, Peer Turbocharged Innovation, if I may. You may frame it differently. But this is, as you said, this is right down your runway, right down your street, Leo. Tell us more.
So 2 things. One, I want to pivot just for a second back to this idea of mindset, because here's another way to think about it. When I was doing my doctoral work at Northeastern, I used to tell people that as I explored subjects and you crawl into the world of academic literature that's been written about some of these topics, I feel like I'm getting dumber by the day, because you start recognizing oh my God, the unbelievable amount of work that exists out there in this topic so far exceeded anything I could possibly imagine. And that is very humbling, and that is something that will keep you in that student and that learning mindset. Back to the peer thing, however, I will say that there's anywhere from 350 to 400 billion dollars spent globally on learning and development.
Yeah.
The problem is not the content, it's not the delivery, it's not any of this kind of stuff. It's the fact that there's no mechanism for people to operationalize their learning. And because of that, you have all this amazing content that goes nowhere, basically, unfortunately, because left to our own devices, we are not typically going to implement even things on our own, let alone be able to lead a team in terms of implementing even a single idea. So when you can form groups inside of companies that are dedicated to operationalize that learning that the company has already invested so much money into, now you can start really implementing things. Now you can start looking and saying, you know what, if we went through this micro learning or we went through a learning and development day, you can get a cross-functional group together and say, what was those one or two things that would be game changers for us if we could just step up and commit to doing that? And then, accepting personal responsibility and holding one another accountable for crossing the finish line with that. That is what I think can be really powerful for organizations today. And they're already spending the money. You might as well take a small fraction of that and put it toward actually making that investment work.
And that's so well said, isn't it? And Leo's been in this field for several decades now, and I have been a practitioner in the field of peer forums and peer experience. And there's no better place, everybody, to hold up a mirror to each other of exactly what Leo just said: taking ownership, taking responsibility, creating accountability, not tolerating excuses of, well, I tried to implement a few things, but I don't have time, or I ran into some resistance, or some hurdles, and I tried to jump them and I failed. And so, I'm sort of defaulting back into the prior normal, not the new normal that the training was all about. And you must see that a lot, Jason, in addition to what Leo said. You must see that a lot, that the payback of the investment isn't as forthcoming as we hoped it would be.
Yeah, and that's the exact reason why our suggested format is the way it is.
Yeah,
and building these internal groups or cohorts or peer groups, resource sharing groups cross-functionally allows them to operationalize this learning and working together. And again, this is this was an aha moment for me, right? Last week I was working with a sales group, and their largest challenge was setting appointments, getting out there, seeing people, talking to people, right? And as a small group in this room for a couple days, it all boiled down to mindset. They're a sales team that's selling in their interest, right? And trying to make appointments, or trying to see people, their communications and their strategies and what they're talking about is their interest, not their customers, right? They're asking prospects for time, right? For time on their calendar, but that's their interest.
I like that.
A simple mindset shift of saying, I want to give you my time.
Yes.
Right. And it was one of the biggest sales aha moments for this sales team, about 12 salespeople. And we're tracking it now. So now we're tracking this and seeing that business impact in regards to, the number of appointments set, and we're going to follow it through the whole process. But it started back with that aha mindset and whose interest you're living in. They weren't learning. They weren't going to learn anything. Right? They were more in tune or more interested in selling something than learning something.
How many? Go ahead, Leo.
Just real quick, I just wanted to follow up on the sales.
Yeah.
How many sales teams have you run into where the idea of sales team is nothing more than an oxymoron? right?
Yeah.
It's a group of people who happen to be doing the same thing. There's no team
That's right.
about it.
That's right.
They don't function that way. It's every man or every woman for themselves. It's about their own. They're about, how do I increase my slice of the pie, as opposed to them working together to make the pie bigger.
Correct.
And there's such opportunities there, because I'm not asking salespeople out of the goodness of their heart to contribute to the success of others. I'm suggesting that when you have someone who's really good at prospecting, really good at closing, really good at messaging, for a particular product or service or whatever, this is where you can help each other, and you can figure out, how do we grow? How do we expand what we're doing so we can all make that, more money, quite frankly. And to your point too, let's maybe pay attention to the interests of our clients versus ourselves, in order to get to the, make that possible. So
I love
anyway,
I love what exactly. And I love what you've been saying, Jason, about that shift of mindset from putting yourself in service of the prospect versus them being in service of you. And it's funny, I had a glass of wine with a career sales professional who now is a fractional sales VP for his clients. And I used the phrase commission breath. And he was like taken aback, and he said, I've never heard that before. And I said, I learned that when I was on the board of a family business that was in the car automotive dealership business. And it was a phrase that they would talk about all the time, to their salespeople. You cannot have commission breath, because your customers smell that in an instant, right? Yeah. You're just in service of yourself. You're not getting your commission check. You're not in service of me and my family, getting the right vehicle for us and our needs. And so you're sort of speaking to the same things that reminded me of that.
It transfers to leadership, right? Yeah. Your interest needs to be in the people you're leading, right? Yes. It's the same basic fundamental principles, whether, whatever corporate discipline you're in, the same fundamental principles apply there.
Yeah, if I may, I'll pivot us to a slightly different track that I wanted to come to that sort of looks at this through the agile lens. And what I see so many organizations talking about being a learning organization, but in reality, they are a history repeats itself organization, because they fail to learn from disruption, from chaos, from incidents and sort of accidents, in their business flow. And what I try to get across to them is that it's not enough to learn about the specifics of what just happened. You've got to dig for the deeper pattern, where there's a deeper level of learning about the fact that we are vulnerable to those kinds of things, not just that specific thing. And if we don't learn at that deeper level, we'll have other specific things of a similar kind. They'll be new and novel. They'll never be the same. Everybody now knows how to deal with a pandemic. Well, guess what? The next new and novel disruption will not be a pandemic. It'll be something else. It'll be artificial intelligence or whatever it is. So what I see all the time is that organizations fail to learn at a deep-seated sort of pattern level sufficiently, where history just repeats itself. Your thoughts on that, Jason?
Well, it reminds me of a funny story. So I'm
awesome.
one of the individuals I'm coaching just had their 50th birthday, and he said to me last week, he says, 3-4 years ago, if you would ask me if I was being pushed and I was learning and I was stretching by the time I got to 50, I would have never even thought it was possible. Because I was really thought, once I hit 50, I'm, it's going to be what it is, and I'm kind of done growing and learning. And he says, well, Steve, how do you really know that's happening? And he says, because it's painful. It hurts. And we had a good laugh about it. But what he was saying about it, it was a deliberate behavior for him to take risk, to increase his vulnerability, to be out there, because he would, if you quit learning, you're going to get surpassed. Yeah. You will plateau. You might even decline in your role within your organization.
Yeah.
And that's what he was getting at. He
Yeah,
was
because history will be repeating itself in new and novel ways. They won't be specifically the same.
Yeah.
And you've not raised your game, and so all of a sudden a pattern emerges where you're not learning, you're not growing. What do we need you for if you're not learning and growing? Leo, what would you add on the fire there?
I want to add this to the fire because of what you said, Mike, and that it was really an aha moment because failure is inevitable. We're going to have failures. Okay. All right. Failing to learn from our failures is inexcusable.
Exactly.
Right. When you really think about it. So that's kind of what it comes down to. And this is Sekou Andrews, right? You win some, you learn some. This is what we have to be thinking about when it comes to this idea of this learning mindset. And not only for us as individuals, but how do we kind of infect the rest of the people around us to actually have that same type of mindset and that attitude that we're going to fail from time to time. Anyone who stretches themselves, anyone who tries something new, that's going to be an iterative process. But if we have those failures and we don't learn from those failures, then shame on us.
Yeah, and it is a subtle mindset, everybody. Something I wanted to mention that springboards off what Leo just said is, of course, I talk about agile a lot, and there's lots of books about agile, but actually one of my favorite books isn't called Agile. It's called Anti-Fragile. And it's by an author called Nassim Nicholas Taleb. And he wrote a very famous book called Anti-Fragile. And the subtitle is Things That Gain from Disorder. That's a learning organization, everybody. We have disorder like a pandemic. How do we gain from it? Not just at a surface level. We all survived the pandemic. If there's ever another pandemic, we'll be okay. But at a deeper seated level, how do you gain from it at that pattern level? Whereby if there's anything new and novel, but of a similar category, not specifically the same, you're less fragile than you otherwise were. And therefore you've become anti-fragile. I worry, I lose sleep about the fact about how many organizations are not anti-fragile at all. They do not learn at a deep-seated level enough for the pattern, and they remain fragile for new and novel things different from what specifically just happened, but similar, and are going to test their agility as deeply as it just got tested. Your thoughts, Jason?
Couldn't say it any better. We see it every day, Mike. I mean, people get in routines, they get in ruts. I mean, again, we're in a world where we have to do more at a higher quality with less, right? And yeah, it is an excuse, right? And it's an excuse that's used on a daily basis. And the only way that you're going to produce more with higher quality is to invest in yourself and continue learning and become more efficient, be more effective, build better teams, work with peers in a more efficient way. And then you're going to be able to accomplish more with less time and resources.
Yeah. What else would you add, Leo, along those kinds of lines?
So I can't tell you the number of CEOs that I've worked with through and after COVID who learned so much about their people by how they responded to a situation that no one anticipated, that no one really, prepared for in any serious way, let's face it. And they were just knocked out by the commitment, by the agility, by the adaptability, by their ability to cooperate and collaborate and just really dig in and work together when it mattered most. And I think that's, was pretty incredible. And I think for the leaders who were really paying attention, they learned a lot about their people, which not only showed them, and to your point about history, how they could deal with something that just happened, but how do we now take some of these things that we've discovered, these assets, these strengths that our team and our people have, how do we propel that forward? And I thought that was really kind of an exciting outcome for a lot of companies today.
Yeah. How do we take the mindsets that just revealed themselves to us? Necessity is the mother of invention, right? We just invented or reminded ourselves, gained some new insights into some new mindsets, some new ways to be, some new ways to think, some new ways to see in the middle of crazy disruption. how do we now institutionalize that to take our agility game to a whole nother level? And, you both know that I came out of the field of flight safety, aviation safety. And, I tell stories, don't I, of accidents that happened in the 70s and 80s, which became the impetus for the aviation industry as an industry, the whole supply chain, all the manufacturers of everything from the whole aircraft all the way down to some of the systems component parts, and the smallest of things can bring down an aircraft. You had to have a learning organization mindset. Otherwise, we wouldn't ever get on a plane these days, because we fly so much, Leo in particular, and Jason, we fly so much that if the statistics were still like they were in the 70s and the 80s, the odds would be stacked against you making it to the next podcast, alive and well and kicking. But
thank you for that.
because the aviation industry has been such a learning organization, nitty gritty, one step at a time, as you said before, just a rigor and a discipline to institutionalize everything that it learns to truly be an anti-fragile industry is a great example of what we're talking about here. And how do we can never achieve the same rigor, everybody, in our organizations, but how can we tap into that mindset more? Never, ever, ever let history repeat itself any more than it necessarily needs to do. Jason, as we start to come to the end here, what other thoughts would you throw on the table here, Jason, that you wanted to mention to our listeners?
A very good friend of mine, an unbelievable colleague of mine, once told me, that if you're going to maintain a competitive advantage, if you're going to be the top of your field, right, if you're truly going to be a thought leader, you better be spending three times more of your efforts and your time in learning than in sharing. And I'll never forget that. And it's so true. An organization and groups within those organizations want to be the best of the best, have a competitive advantage. They better be putting a lot of effort in learning rather than sharing.
Yeah, you better be a sponge, right? You better be listening and looking a lot more than you're talking.
Correct.
You better be diversifying your learning, not just going to the same old conferences and reading the same old magazines that you always read. There's that idea, everybody, that the future's already here. It's just not evenly distributed. It's out there on the fringe. And you got to go future hunting on the fringe to find it before it gets here like a freight train. Yeah. So very well said. Leo, what would you leave our listeners with?
I just think that, your example, Mike, when you're looking at, 70s and 80s, and you're looking at largely command and control organizations that had people's lives in their hands, it really gives you an appreciation for the value and importance and the discipline around psychological safety, which brings people in service of safety, in service of those people's lives, that no matter where you are in the organization, you have to have that permission to say something when you see something. And I think for organizations, no matter what they're doing, have a culture where, again, in service of what you care about and what you love and all of that, you've got to be able to bring that type of culture and that type of learning mindset to the table.
Yeah, I love that. Say something when you see something, everybody, not just at the level of symptoms, not just at the level of specific chaos that we just encountered, but at that deeper level of a recurring pattern that you continue to see that we're just not tackling. And if we're not careful, is going to keep us fragile for whatever the next recurring for the next kind of disruption is that comes along. And everybody, it isn't by accident that our work here and our latest ebook is called The One Advantage, a peer-powered culture of agility. That is the essence of a lifelong learning mindset. Lifelong learning, being a learning organization, is at the very essence of that one advantage. It is the only competitive advantage that you really have these days. Everything else is increasingly temporary, increasingly quickly, probably bigger, faster, and sooner than your worst nightmare. So there we are, everybody, leveraging a lifelong learning mindset. You heard it here, and we hope you will come back next time to hear some more. We'll look forward to having you with us then. Thanks for being here, Jason. Thanks for being here, Leo. Another episode of the One Advantage podcast.
Thanks for listening to the One Advantage podcast. If you liked this episode, please consider helping us by rating us wherever you listen, spreading the word, having us as a guest on your podcast or webinar, and mentioning us in social media. Find us at the One Advantage podcast, where you can get more information about us and this episode. Thanks again for listening, and we look forward to more great episodes to come.